especially because I had 3 children, to be so bold to ask about a married man seems very presumptuous in our community. I'm sure in others, imagining that a man, especially one with many other children, wants to take the responsibility for your kids is taking a lot for granted. Eventually, Mary convinced Cody to talk to the church leader. This is an important step in our faith for several reasons, one of which is so the church can make sure this man has pure intentions and is not simply wife chasing. Cody was uncharacteristically shy about approaching the leader, but when Christine and Mary accompanied him to the meeting, Cody was immediately given permission to talk to my father. When Cody called my father to ask permission to court me, my father was guarded. He knew how badly I had been hurt before. You can't court her, but you can get to know her, my father said. No flowers, no chocolates, no love letters. Since I lived so far from Cody, he and I talked on the phone regularly. Mary and I also kept in contact. Eventually, we started visiting on weekends. Whenever Cody visited me, he brought one of the wives or several of his children so that I could get to know the family better. During this process, we were very chaste. We never hugged. We only held hands a couple of times, and that was in order to say a prayer. The only time we were alone during the getting to know each other process was to get chicken from the grocery store. Soon, I started to fall in love with him. I felt safe with Cody and felt comfortable with his family. Cody did and said everything perfectly. He proved himself to me effortlessly. However, I was still waiting for a eureka moment when I knew without a doubt that I was meant to be part of Cody's family. I wanted fireworks and fanfare. I wanted angels singing in my ears. I wanted a sign from God. While I was waiting for this to happen, I wanted to deepen my relationship with Cody, so I told my dad, who called Cody and gave him permission to court me at last. Now we're back to Cody. For a couple of years before I met Robin, I had been working as a sales representative selling advertising for billboards. While this job allowed me to work locally, it was tough to make a living. There were times when I could barely sell at all. The day Robin's father called and gave me permission to court her, my sales career had hit an all-time low. Things were so tough, I was considering selling my car. I didn't have 2 nickels to rub together, but I was still considering courting this amazing woman. I was certain that God would find a way for me to bring Robin into my life. After I got off the phone with Robin's dad, I told the wives we received permission to court. Luckily, Robin was visiting Lehigh at the time, so we could immediately go on a date. My wives were all excited for me. Each of them had received the answer that Robin was meant to be in our family. In fact, Christine had received a more intense spiritual witness that Robin should marry me than she had received about her own marriage. Together we teased Robin mercilessly about the fact that we all knew her destiny. My wives and I were in what Robin called the knowing club. While Robin was waiting for her answer on our first date, over lunch, Robin and I confessed everything about ourselves to each other. Stretch marks, smelly feet, bad habits. We wanted to get all the silly stuff out of the way. When we got back in the car, it had rained slightly and the sky was beautiful, and with sunlight pushing through the rain clouds, I looked over at Robin and I love you, I said. I couldn't help myself. Saying those words was a relief, an absolute cathartic experience. Now we're back to Robin. I may have loved Cody, but I wasn't saying it until I was 100% Words can be cheap, and I wanted to be careful. Now that we were courting, Cody and I started visiting with each other without the company of his wife. It was time to get to know each other better. I didn't want to be rushed into a marriage and feeling that was unfamiliar. I know some people in our faith want a quick courtship and engagement, but I needed to build a better foundation, and I didn't want to go to my wedding day and wedding bed with someone else who was a relative stranger in God's testimony. I wanted a romantic love. Some of my sister wives were more interested in the sisterhood than in the husband, but perhaps since I had been married before, I knew that I needed a man who I loved, trusted, and cherished and adored. I also knew that asking for and receiving all these things is hard. During the visit I made to Cody, I began to pray and fast in order to receive a sign or an affirmation that I was meant to be in his family. I needed something concrete. I knew I was falling in love with him. I felt him breaking down all my walls. I felt Shira putting away her sword. On one of our dates, we drove to Thanksgiving Point. Before we looked out where Cody had a billboard he was eager to sell. On this drive, I had a singular experience. I felt my heart start to swell. It seemed to be growing bigger in my chest. It even hurt. I started to feel out of breath, but also at peace, because I was with Cody and he was wonderful. Suddenly, I felt as if the Heavenly Spirit was talking to me, and I knew this was my affirmation. I knew without a doubt that this is who I was meant to marry. I burst into tears, and Cody looked at me, wondering what was wrong. Then he began to cry too. We were both so overcome. Now we are back to Cody, and this is the last part. And then there's pictures that will be a separate video after this part. I had been planning to ask Robin to marry me on her birthday, but I jumped again. A few days before her birthday, she told me that an older, esteemed man in our faith had called to inquire about courting her. This was a shock to my system. I was devastated. I didn't have money to marry and support Robin, but I knew that I would have to find a way. Even though Robin told the man she knew where she belonged, I was still shaken. The next day, Robin and I drove out to Thanksgiving Point. As we were sitting there talking, I was overcome with what I believed was God's Spirit. Before I knew what I was doing, I took her hand and asked her to marry me. When Christine got engaged, she told me she wouldn't kiss me until we were at the altar. We were at the altar, and after we were married, she realized she had made a mistake and made me promise that if I married again, I'd kiss my next wife before we said our vows. So I took Robin's face in my hands and kissed her. Robin leaped out of the car and began to dance around. She was so happy and joyful. I got out of the car and she jumped in my arms. This happened on September 26th. We wouldn't get married for 6 months. Our lives were in upheaval, and I couldn't support Robin yet. I couldn't even move her to our town. But I knew God was helping me to do what it would to bring our families together when the time was right. And that's the end of the chapter part of chapter 4.